Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're talking national political news of the day, and we're going to start with a topic we haven't really discussed recently to kind of get everybody updated and talk a little bit about its impact on American politics, which right now is kind of not not having a big impact, but could depending on how things go. But the war, as we reported, and as probably most people know, has shifted away from Kyiv down into the east, the Donetsk province, where there's been a separatist movement and Russian semi-occupation for quite a few years. And also there's action in the south, Kherson. It's kind of opposite. Russia is pushing to expand its territory in the east and maybe just hold on to that and then negotiate some type of separation there. The problem that Russia's running into is Ukraine is now encroaching on Kherson, the only major city that the Russians have taken and managed to hold for a long time. But it looks like the Ukrainians have crossed a river, a crucial river, and there have been dogfights over and around Kherson, and Ukraine is threatening there.
You say Ukraine, you mean Russia, right?
No, Ukraine is
okay.
Kherson has been held by Russia. So.
Gotcha.
And there's a lot of, but Russia has been able to make incremental gains over the past couple of weeks in territory. But as to whether or not they're winning, the title of this is Russia winning the war? My answer is definitively no. But they're not losing as badly as they were up in Kyiv. It's kind of a little bit of a stalemate. The problem is they're losing tanks every day and BMPs and all of their armored vehicles, and their Orlan drones are coming down. And right now, because of the blockades of the boycott of Russia, they can't remake their main tanks, the T-70s. And so every tank they lose, either captured or destroyed, is gone. And they have lost quite a bit of their armor, and that is going to limit their ability unless they really just try to focus. But in the meantime, they're carpet bombing like crazy. And Ukrainians are asking for more sophisticated weaponry. Biden has promised some of it, precision rockets that have range of something like 50 miles, but they want to get an assurance that none of the weapons that we give them are going to be used for going across the border. A little bit, we'll talk a little bit too about Biden's op-ed piece in the New York Times today. But Dave, I'm going to let you in here.
Yeah, so sorry. For some reason I thought you were talking about a different advance when I interrupted you. It's hard to pronounce, but I'm just going to try. Oh God, I'm going to have to squint too. It's really small. The region you talked about, Lysychansk. There's a nearby city called Sierra. I'm going to massacre it. Severodonetsk. Mm-hmm. And so what I was thinking, what I had been looked at prior to us on this call is that Russia is in fact advancing
in the city.
Yes.
In that city. They haven't taken it all yet, or as last I heard, but they
correct.
Correct. But they did. They weren't able to encircle it as they wanted to.
Right. And so that's the small development that I for some reason misheard you speaking about. But what I was also thinking about is the larger advances that are happening. So from around that region, Russia is advancing somewhat from the south, and closing in on one of the last remaining areas under Ukrainian control in eastern Luhansk. Mm-hmm. So there, like you said, there's to a certain extent it's a stalemate, but there's it's hot. It's not like they're not fighting.
No, there's a lot of fighting, a lot of killing going on.
Yeah, and I think that's partly explains why what we're seeing is the United States has now committed another $700 million weapons package. I think, like you said, includes advanced rocket systems. Which that's what they've been asking for all along, and like you said, the main fear was that those weapons can reach deep into Russia, or not that deep, but far enough into Russia. They're very sophisticated and powerful. But interestingly, Russia, as a sideshow, did perform a nuclear drill near Moscow with 1,000 troops to just try to I guess, posture and remind everybody of the consequences of too much aid and possibly escalation if NATO were to escalate at all. But this kind of segues nicely into Biden's op-ed piece, where he's trying to set the tone that that NATO and the U.S. has no intention of escalating. We're here to be an ally.
Right. Yeah, they're not going to escalate. They're kind of a lot of the same thing, but kind of a big deal thing he did say today in terms of the resolution of the war.
Absolutely.
And what was that?
So he said the principle is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. I'm not pressuring the Ukrainian government in private or public to make any territorial concessions. It would be wrong and contrary to well-settled principles to do so. So that's it's basically an explicit rebuke of the diplomacy. Earlier in that op-ed piece in the New York Times, Biden also said, as President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine has said, ultimately this war, this is a quote, will only definitively end through diplomacy. Every negotiation reflects the facts on the ground. And so that kind of spells out what's happening. They've committed to now adding advanced weaponry. We've talked about Javelin anti-tanks and Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. We've talked about artillery. Now we've talked about rocket systems, but they've also, in this op-ed, the president, Biden, mentions unmanned aerial vehicles, helicopters, and more ammunition. So there is depends on how you define the term, but there is an escalation in lethality with stated goal of changing the situation on the ground. And then when you add that to, and by the way, no territorial concessions, that leads to, I would say, that paints the picture for a very long, drawn out confrontation.
Yeah, I have to say I'm really disappointed in the media coverage of this. I mean, they have military experts who ought to be able to explain to them that basically in this type of warfare where you've got one inferior force fighting another, they're not going to try to hold territory so much. At least they're not going to dig in with it. They're going to move and they're going to strategically get to where they can strike, because the Russians, and this is where they have the disadvantage, is if they're not really up against a guerrilla force right now. It's not quite that fluid, but their job is to win and claim territory. The Ukrainians are just to destroy armor, kill Russians, basically. And they're just going to find every way to do that. And if you go to the open source materials, you'll see Stugna after Stugna taking tank after tank out, taking out armored cars, taking out trucks, mines, and the rest. And the point is, their job is to make it so that the Russian invasion and occupation is not sustainable. Russia is trying to pacify a certain area of the country. And when one of those things happens, there'll probably be some effective diplomacy.
And just for context or scope or scale, the amount pledged by the United States in combined aid, which was at $1.40 billion, but as it goes up by $1 billion here and $1 billion there, we're talking about real money over time. This is a significant portion of the entire national budget the entire annual budget for Russia military, which is like 60-ish billion. So this is a major commitment. And like you said, as more advanced, and again, I think you and I both wish that this was not that our opinions matter so much, but that there was some diplomatic path. But as of now, it seems like the weekly sort of updates are less and less about diplomacy and more about what's it going to take to get there. And with the precision targeting, as the United States gives more and more help with that, it increases the lethality and efficacy of the weapons that we're letting them borrow, that we're pledging to them. And I guess we're granting them the money to buy them from us, kind of thing. And just as a reminder for folks who didn't follow this in the past when we talked about it, the United States did reinstate a a World War II era law that allows the president unilateral decision making when it comes to giving this type of credit, with no limitation. It's basically an economic world war. There's NATO countries. There's another, and I forget the exact number, but I think it's like another 40 or so other countries are aligned. And so it's the escalation potential is really there, although we're not seeing it on a week by week.
All right. Just quick note that the anti-war movement has taken a new turn in Russia. They're at the Weatherman stage. They're setting basically draft centers on fire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So more to talk about that, but I think the short is Russia is not winning the war. Nobody is. It's war.
Right.
Next topic. Okay, the other big issue, and this is the big political issue that will probably determine what happens to a certain degree in November, is inflation. It's persisting. Food is still up there. Gasoline just climbed up to well over $6 in our area, but to ridiculous proportions. And no matter how much the Democrats try to argue, and probably rightfully, that this is corporate greed and not any type of shortage of gas or oil on the market at the moment, the fact of the matter is these companies and a lot of other companies are reaping in profits. Inflation is not cutting into the corporate profits. That's one thing we're learning, at least not in all of the industries. The tech stocks are kind of lagging right now. This is probably a good time to buy in if you want to, on all of them because of a number of factors. But other than that, the stocks will probably go up again soon because it really has little to do. The stock market really, as I've learned over the years, has very little to do with the economic health down on the ground with working class people. And when the unemployment goes down and jobs increase, they yawn. I mean, it's really not a big deal to them. And the same thing mostly with inflation. They're a little bit concerned now because there are some uncertainty. That's mostly what they don't like is uncertainty around it. But, it looks like the Federal Reserve is on its way to upping the interest rates. And Biden today distinguished himself from Trump by reinforcing that the Fed is an independent entity and not subject to political power. That's part of why it's controversial. It's like, what branch of the three branches does it represent? It's like its own branch, but but anyway, they are going to do that. And Biden has also introduced some other anti-inflation, and again, I think you referred to it as the core. There is an inflation indicator that shows some hope that maybe at least it's peaking because it was down to 6.5% as opposed to 8% a month ago, and that is basically prices that don't include food and fuel. Unfortunately, that's outside of housing, those are the biggest expenses for most households, but it's an indication of where it's maybe peaking. And we can talk a little bit about what Biden intends to do, what his plan is to at least look like he's doing something.
So the president was pretty busy with his op-eds this week. I guess this one was a couple days ago I think it was the Washington Post, and we referred in the last segment to one op-ed he published the New York Times. trying to, I guess, get ahead of some of these narratives or rein in some of these narratives, depending how you look at it. But he talks about in his op-ed about the economy to fight inflation. There's three main segments. One, as you alluded to, was the Federal Reserve. He says that they have primary responsibility to control inflation, and they've signaled in every way possible that they intend to just keep raising interest rates, almost like a play out of the playbook of Volcker, who was the Fed Reserve chair back, around 1980-ish, when interest rates were raised to like over 10% to cool. And that's when we had stagflation. People are pointing that maybe that's something similar with a stagnant economy with high inflation, but this economy is not stagnant.
No, it's not.
Although we may have a recession. I think I'm not an economist, but a two quarters of negative growth is technically a recession, and truthfully, that doesn't seem like it's impossible to happen. So, but it's not like the economic collapse of 2008, where we're fearful of an absolute depression. Like, it's nothing like that. In fact, in Biden's op-ed, so Section 2 was making every practical step to make things more affordable for families and boost productivity to grow the economy. And we'll talk about the details there in a minute. But the third was keep reducing the federal deficit, which eases price pressures. And he explicitly points out that the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, published that the deficit will probably fall by $1.7 trillion this year, which is the largest in history. Now, granted, that's because there was such extraordinary measures for the pandemic. But Biden has actually said that leaves the deficit as a share of the economy lower than pre-pandemic levels. And lower than the CBO projected for this year before the American Rescue Plan passed. So basically what he's saying is, hey, that stimulus that we did put in there is in fact helping the economy, the larger picture, but also on the current account side. So the amount of money that we're borrowing versus the amount of money that we're bringing in revenues, because of some growth and some expansion and some spending, taxes getting taxed on that are bringing more money in, reducing the deficit. And then my last thing about this, just to complete the picture of what the article said, was that he said that this progress is not inevitable. This progress was because we are winding down the emergency programs, and half of the deficit deduction was because of an increase in revenues. So he's basically saying there is a rapid recovery. Like, in other words, even if there are small technical indicators that there is a recession or near recession, because we had that negative GDP last quarter, we are in fact seeing signs of growth and more revenue for the government.
Yeah, no, definitely. Although, typically speaking, you can't really say a stimulus plan is anti-inflationary. So it's, it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, but people are starting to feel the pinch now, in that inflation is in excess of their wage increases. They had enjoyed some increase in wage power, in spending power, that is pretty much erased, at least for the time being, and it's really hitting hard in terms of the food. And as we both know, and as we've discussed on previous shows, the price of gasoline probably will not drop that much while the war is happening. That's got everything there. And there's another aspect of the war that we didn't talk about, is the grain that can't get out of Ukraine. And that's having a big impact. That I didn't realize quite how big a market share they had of the world's grain. And there's even talks about organizing. We were talking about air safe zones before, but an ocean safe zone of going through. But of course, everybody's afraid that might lead to escalation if the international boats have free route in and out, protected by an international force. Russia's not going to agree to that. They want to keep the pressure on in their favor. So prices will probably still be high, but they can only get so high before people stop buying things. And I think that's starting to be what happened. They're starting to go buy more hamburger rather than steaks, and maybe even turkey meat and the rest, and more produce. They're even starting to use public transit more right now and walk more, which a lot of environmentalists would say is a good thing. But at any rate, it can only get so high, because supply and demand. That we have the demand curve. If the prices get out of control, then they don't do. The problem with food is that the farmers take the hit then, because they're not price setters. They have to take price whatever they can get. It's everybody in between that's raking in the money on that. It's a tough one. Will Biden's plan have an effect? There's only so much a president can do, but you got to look like you're doing something. You got to look like you're taking some action.
So yeah, just a couple things to key on what you said. One is people are feeling like the inflation is outstripping their advances in their compensation, because the metrics are showing that it's like the gap is 8% inflation, 5% wage growth. That's a 3% loss of wages in purchasing power. So yeah, you're going backwards even when you get a raise. So that's the feeling part. Plus the sticker shock, the nominal numbers, the things that we're seeing. And that's affecting energy, and energy is 70% of food. So besides Russia's restrictions on oil and restrictions on food into the international systems of energy and food, that's causing compounding prices, which are shocking. So it's no wonder, like I said, that Biden has a plan that he's put forward. So anyway, I'll just say this real quickly. There's a few things in the plan. You can find it for yourself, but they are all really the bully pulpit as opposed to technical, assertive ways to improve costs.
Yeah. All right. We'll be talking about that because inflation's not going anywhere. All right. The next topic has been kind of obscure for a while. It's been going on quietly, but those of you who pay attention to politics may remember that John Durham was appointed by Trump to investigate the Russia probe. By Barr under Trump, to investigate the Russia probe, including the Steele document and all of the other issues that were happening, with Trump hoping that it was going to basically reveal a big conspiracy on the part of Democrats to bring him down, and to come up with theories about collusion. Well, Durham hasn't come up with a whole lot in that, and in fact, he spent $40 million on it so far, and it's taken 4 years. And the one thing that he found, well, actually, there's two possible charges. There is something else coming up, but what he found to be able to prosecute, and I think he was hoping to pressure, was Michael Sussman. Michael Sussman was a Hillary Clinton operative who basically went to the FBI claiming to be a concerned citizen and didn't reveal that he had actually been working for the Clinton campaign. And technically speaking, it's against the law to lie to the FBI about an investigation. Well, that's scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as things are concerned. I'm not even sure he's going to come under attorney discipline, ethics discipline for that. But he basically was. They took it to a trial, and a jury took 6 hours, much less time than the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. Jury took to come up with a unanimous not guilty verdict. And this is a big blow to Durham. Durham was supposedly somebody with gravitas that might have some bipartisanship. He's lost it right now. He probably should wind this thing up. But without even that one kind of I don't know, minor charge that really had nothing to do with anything pertaining to Trump, was just something they happened to find out. This is $40 million with nothing to show for, and there is going to be probably pressure to shut that down.
Yeah, I really like the way you framed the issue. I think it's accurate, and I think that your conclusion is accurate. That big picture, this was Durham was appointed because President Trump and his supporters wanted to uncover and prosecute the deep state conspiracy against him. But like you said, there were only 2 charges. One was against Sussman for this case that we're talking about today, and the other one was the researcher that worked on the Steele dossier, which was a list of things that apparently Russia might have had over Trump to show that he was one of their assets under their control. And both of these cases, a broad spectrum of observers have said that both of these are like the charges were that they were making false statements. The charges weren't that there was a conspiracy. The charges weren't that they were defrauding. It's a really small ball sort of charge in both of those cases. In fact, what it sounds like, I mean, based on reporting that I saw, is that these were part of like media campaigns to say there's a connection between Trump. We can make the case that there's a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign. And this one in particular was about some software that they found on a computer. So the guy who found the software on the computer is also a expert that works for the Democratic Party. And, you know, there was an intermediary person who said, hey, you should take this on behalf, you know, to FBI, and we should promote this publicly. So it was a PR campaign that, by the way, they could say there was an FBI investigation. You know, it's well reported that the FBI thought it was flimsy at best and not really pertinent or relevant to anything criminal, because it's not criminal to for what they did to try to
collude with Russia. It is not criminal to collude with Russia. Michael Flynn can meet with Russian operatives, give them polling data for their social media campaign, but it's not against the law.
I wasn't even going to go that far, but I'm glad you did. But trying to persuade a reporter about a suspicion is not a crime. So that's what a lot of this is saying, hey guys, they uncovered Sussman, you know, was part of a PR campaign, but he wasn't part of a criminal conspiracy. I mean, that's really the gist of this. And like you said, the linkages are just. It probably explains why the jury was so quick to acquit.
Well, also, the case was weak from the beginning, because it's not against the law just to lie to the FBI about anything. There's two cases where it's against the law to lie if you're trying to do it to obstruct an investigation, but there was no investigation yet. He was lying to get an investigation going. And then it's against the law to lie in order to present a fraudulent case, to have somebody go after, to basically tarnish somebody. But that wasn't the case either, because in fact there was something solid to investigate, just wasn't that big of a deal. So without one of those other elements, he couldn't be found guilty. Durham could not meet the burden of the elements in this, and he never should have sent this to trial. In fact, he should have wrapped up the investigation a long time ago.
And I'm with you that, and I think we're saying the same thing. I really do think it was about the PR, and this is you know, granted, we only have two parties, and the two parties are constantly at each other, and they'll take any advantage they can get. But like you said, I mean, you're the lawyer in the room, and I trust your opinion here. But just to repeat, this is from the New York Times. It says Mr. Sussman's guilt or innocence turned on a narrow issue, whether he made a false statement to a senior FBI official at the 2016 meeting by saying he was sharing those suspicions on his own. So in other words, they were saying, like, you didn't really share with them that you think there might be a crime representing yourself. You were working for other people. That means it was a bigger thing, and they can't prove he wasn't like that.
What he wanted to do was not have them not investigate, because they didn't want to get involved in the campaign. That's what he was trying to do, but that had nothing to do with the merits of what he was presenting, and it wasn't trying to mislead him into doing anything other than investigate. Not ethical, you know, to do that, but not a crime.
And we do have a little more time, so I say we look a little bit at the implications of something like this. You know, I know both of us look at a whole broad spectrum of different media sources, and there are different avenues of attack, so to speak. There's a lot of bias depending on where you look, and so you know, depending how you feel. Like, I go to the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Guardian or the Financial Times or ... Right? There's a whole set of newspapers that I think aren't particularly partisan, but other people go, oh my God, you read that? Well, you could flip that on its head, and you can name some others, but what I was going to mention here is the political implications of this are that, you know, are people who wanted to think there was some connection some illegal connection between President Trump and his campaign and Russia. Some people did want to believe that, but this it didn't pan out in the court of law, certainly. And the flip side is that if there are folks who thought that Durham was going to find this collusion and this conspiracy that that somehow would make the case that, see, we told you that the deep state is against President Trump, but that also wasn't found, which leads me to, and I'm going to ask your opinion, I know we have limited time, but like, it seems to me that this is a lot of posturing, a lot of sort of team building, a lot of PR and spin, and not a lot of substance on those two counts.
I mean, yes, that's the case, but most Republicans just retreated from it. They didn't say anything. Trump went on a rant about how it's an indication that the country's falling apart. And some of the right-wing media was really disappointed and thinking either deep state or these fancy lawyers tricked the juries and blah, blah, blah. Maybe we shouldn't have juries, some of them say. But you're not seeing a whole lot of interest in this from people like McConnell or any of the, or McCarthy or any of the heavy hitters in the Republican Party. They probably would be happy to see this thing gone too, just because it's one more reminder of Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Okay. All right, that takes us to the next one.
On a bright school morning, Alyssa went out to greet the day. Tossed her soccer bag in the back seat of the car, thinking about the game she would play. Now we see her picture in the paper, and her big brown eyes seem to say, you've got blood on your hands, you just stand by while children die. You've got blood on your hands, money means more to you than living people do. Track team should have been there.
All right, we have discussed this horrible tragedy with the kids. One more horrible tragedy, and won't be the last. And the fact that in the United States there are 45,000 gun deaths sometimes a year. I think the average right now is 40,000. I used to gripe in the 1990s when it was 15,000. I forget which country is number two, but it's like 350. If you're counting, except for countries that have civil wars or something like that. But at any rate, we again, every time this happens, we have a discussion about possible bills that could go through, but there's just the NRA has taken such an extreme position. I mean, the last time they took any kind of position was some years ago when they agreed to support a bill that banned machine guns, the private ownership of machine guns. They're sorry for that. They see that as a slippery slope, right? Well, they're worried about having mandatory background checks that are more effective, any types of limits on the safety of the gun, any type of tracking of the gun. One of the possibilities is to basically have computer tracking of all of the guns from the manufacturer based on the serial number through the wholesaler, retailer to private person, so that there is a record of, if they find a gun in the hands of a criminal, they can trace it back to the person who last legally possessed it. No, they don't want that because that's all draconian. Well, we've got, what is it, more guns than people now in this country, more gun shops than there are bookshops, and just it's absolutely crazy. And most of the people aren't dying in these crazy deaths, the mass shootings. Most people are dying because they know people and they pull them out in fights, arguments, and they pull out a gun and they shoot sometimes their partner or, friends or whatever. But there's also gang violence in the cities being used by people who somehow get these guns. And so there is a bill that is being discussed with by 50 Democrats and 4 Republicans at last I saw. That's not enough to overcome a filibuster, but they are talking about what they call a red flag bill, which basically would give the courts authority to determine that, hey, you're kind of dangerous right now. You don't get to have a gun until we ascertain and until we ascertain that you're not dangerous, right? No, there's not. There's no movement even towards that. They don't want to give courts that type of limited ability. They don't want to make it so that people who are guilty of domestic violence, which is where a lot of the gun deaths and injuries happen, and they just don't. They just absolutely aren't going to move. As long as there's a filibuster, it probably doesn't have any chance whatsoever. But they are talking, and maybe for political positioning for some future date. And again, it's 4 of the 7 who voted for the impeachment of Trump the second time around, and Toomey is outgoing anyway, right? So it's just anyway, I'm going to let you take it from here, but I don't see any chance that this is going to go anywhere and pass. It'll pass the House. It won't pass the Senate.
So this is an issue that of course, we're going to cover in more detail over time because it's so shocking to people's sense of justice and responsibility. I think that Congress is an absentee, air quotes, leader, exhibiting absentee leadership on this. That's why I think they have to have a conversation, because they realize that it would be a glaringly obvious liability not to. But like you said, I mean, the Republican Party writ large is so beholden to the NRA in particular, but the interests of more extreme gun policies overall. But that said, Lindsey Graham, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, they did co-sponsor a red flag bill back in 2019. And they've begun making revisions to a current version of it that they hope at least can get those 10 elusive Republican senators, and it's obviously very doubtful, but it's at least it's a serious conversation. So 2 things I think before I pass back to you. One is Florida did pass a red flag law signed by the current Senator Rick Scott when he was governor, and they use it a lot, actually. It's basically like a court. It could be family initiated. It could be a law enforcement agency can initiate it. It goes before a judge. A judge places an order. Then the law enforcement agency has the obligation to say, look, you've been, a judge has determined that you're in a state of mind such that you're a potential threat to yourself or others, and we're going to temporarily confiscate. And that happens in Florida. And so that's a Republican initiative, so that at least gives some plausibility to this conversation. And so what the most recent reporting about what they're actually talking about is, all right, what are you really even talking about? They're in that very initial stage where they're trying to figure out the timeline between a court order prompted by evidence of extreme risk and a hearing, and then the scope and type of evidence required. So they're actually into the nitty gritty right now, and basically saying, like, well, what does it mean if this happens, or what does it mean if that happens, and like trying to like exhibit some degree of statesmanship. I think here I'll give them a little bit of credit for that. And so I'll let you say, before we pivot to the other bill that's being considered, any further thoughts on the likelihood?
I think you pretty much covered it. I mean, like I said, it's good that they're working it out, but it's probably something that's not going to pass anytime soon. But let's get to the other one.
Okay, so the other bill, that's Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who actually went on the TV show circuit this weekend and really pushed the issue, appealing to sensibilities of the average person, and also Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas. And this is why this one is actually arguably more important, although less likely, because while both Graham and Cornyn are very close to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Cornyn is from Texas, and right now that's sort of the hot button area, and that's a place that would be probably most resistant to government intervention in this type federal government intervention. And so the idea would be that they could fall back on, the senators could say, well, we could talk about it, but in reality, that let's leave this to the states. I think this is really the one that where you can air other ideas besides the red flag laws. And so right now there's 19 states that empower judges to take away a firearm from red flag issues. And so Senator Murphy mentioned that based on the stats that he's got, for every 10 to 20 firearms removed in a red flag situation, one life is saved. And California has, according to the New York Times, at least 21 cases where a red flag law has disarmed somebody who threatened a mass shooting. Yeah. So there, in other words, we're at that point. I mean, we're obviously very early in the public digesting the nuances of these laws, but the idea that it's something that is anathema to gun owners is just not true. There are lots of folks out there who think that reasonable changes are necessary. We could talk about that at length, about the stats and the polling, et cetera. But the vast majority of Americans want some reasonable restrictions. I'll just give you one example. The idea that there's a background check on every gun that changes hands, that's true for stores and distributors. It's not true for private people. No. So whenever you're at a gun show, there's lots of people who are just private citizens. They're not companies, and they can do whatever they want. So there's a lot of folks that say that's got to change. Like, there's no reasonable world that exists in which we can't figure out a way. I mean, you need a permit to have a dog, and you need a permit to have a car, et cetera. What's the reason why we wouldn't do some kind of documentation of exchanges of guns? And the main reason is because people are fearful that they're going to get taken away. So if you can handle both,
the slippery slope is like the obsession that they have. You give anything, and we're going to lose all our gun rights. It fits into the paranoia of certain brands of politics right now. But it's really bad. And we already have some laws. For instance, if you have a restraining order against you, that you can't possess or own a gun for that time. You got to turn them over to the dealers until that restraining order is either denied when there's a hearing to make it permanent, or when it expires. We have that. NRA fought that. They weren't able to overturn it. So it's anyway. I mean, again, we're going so much into the topic, but the bottom line is nothing's going to happen for a long time. All right. Our last topic of the night is we've got some redistricting updates to talk about. And almost every state has now introduced a map that is quote unquote permanent, not permanent so much because there's a lot of litigation that's going to take place beyond the November election to determine what those districts are going to look like in long term. But the Supreme Court has basically said, don't send us any more cases right now. We're not going to overturn anything before the November election. So table it. And we're down to, I believe, New Hampshire is the only state that has officially not got a map that's submitted in place, although a bunch of them are in litigation, so it's fluid, but again, not until November. Two more states have established it. Well, actually, a bunch of them, and I haven't covered all of them, but I want to focus today on Missouri and Florida. And I want to start with Missouri. Missouri it has become a very red state. It was purple for a long time. It was a state that Democrats could get elected in statewide for quite some time, until a few terms ago. That Missouri was a state that Democrats could possibly win for the presidential election. It hasn't worked out that way recently, and it's never been a great state for Democrats in terms of House districts, not since the Civil Rights era, actually. And basically, for those of you who are watching TV, you can see the new map that has been approved, which is not as bad for Democrats, believe it or not, as what could have been approved. But basically you've got two Democratic districts. You got, and they're very deep blue there, and you've got 5 or 6 Republican leading districts, all very red. If you go to 538, and into on the home page and look in the right hand column, you'll see a map of the United States that's got lots of red and blue on it. Click on that, and then when the map that comes up, you can click on the individual states, and you can see what I'm talking about if you're listening to me on the radio or other media. So basically, what some Republicans wanted, and they got angry about it, and there was a whole to-do with filibusters and everything happening, is they wanted to break up that St. Louis district, and so that they would be Republican or at least competitive. And they had maps in which they could do so. Because of the unique politics, I'm not going to get into all of the weeds. That did not happen. There's the map that actually came through is this one, and one of the reasons is because if they succeeded in breaking up that, they would have to have split a black community basically in half in order to do that. That used to be against the law under the Voting Rights Act back when it had some teeth, but it's not now. However, there were Republicans and a governor who did not want to see this happen. And there were Republicans in one of the branches of the House that were saying, look, if we're going to oppose gerrymandering in blue states, we got to not be doing it here, at least not that ridiculously. And so this for now is the map. There may be a map. It's approved. It probably won't be in litigation, but there are some groups that say that there should be more competitive districts. But that's a whole other topic, and I haven't seen any litigation about that so far.
Yeah, I'll just add, and thank you for your detailed coverage of this. I know you follow it very closely. I also just, I'd rather get a little bit of a cursory overview. But one thing, just to reiterate what you said, there was a standoff. The issue here in Missouri was that the House wanted to do basically what the state legislature wanted to do, what ended up being the ultimate outcome, but the state Senate side was saying, nope, let's not give up a single seat. So they ended up agreeing to this district in St. Louis that's like 52% favor to Democrats, and then the district in Kansas City that's only 20% favor to Democrats, and that's it. But they fought this to the end. They fought this right up until the very last day of their state legislative session. But then ultimately the conservative push to heavily gerrymander, like you said, cooler heads prevailed, and they went back to just air quotes 5-2.
Yeah, I'm going to go down because we don't have a whole lot of time. I want to go down to Florida. And those of you can see either on your television screen or because you have gone to the 538 site is you've got the new map and the old, and if you click on old map, it takes you to an old map I'll tell you why that's important. But if you look up above new map and old map, you will see a purple rectangle that shows that it is in litigation and pending. Well, the Democrats and other advocates of voter rights advocates know that they're not going to be able to overturn this whole map in anytime soon. DeSantis signed a very draconian map. He presented his own map, basically, because the Republicans in the legislatures weren't being draconianly pro-Republican enough. In his map, it potentially gives the Republicans an increase of 4 districts, and which would be the biggest of any state so far. Switch based on these maps, it might not be the biggest switchover, but and so if you take a look at the new map, you'll see that the whole top half of Florida is red, solid beet red. If you look at the old map, you'll see that in Florida's you'll see a blue district along the Georgia border there. And currently that is held by Al Lawson, a African-American Democrat. And because this district was actually created to promote some political expression of the Black communities. And DeSantis argues that's against the law, that's discrimination. And so basically, if you go back and forth between the new maps, you'll see that the Republicans have split that in half. They are contending that this is a direct violation of not only the laws in Florida, but the Voting Rights Act, the people who are challenging it. And they figure if they can focus on that one district, they can save that one district for this election and worry about all of the gerrymandering in the South, which is also considerable later. But it does look like the Republicans will very likely take at least 3, if not 4 additional seats here, assuming the elections go well for them, because there are not very many. There's a few competitive districts in the new map, but not many.
Thank you again for being astute here. One thing worth pointing out is that Florida did grow in population since the last census, so they did pick up a seat. Yes. And they also, Republican leadership did get to design this map, as you said, and so they've designed it pretty heavily in their own favor, of course. And one big takeaway is there was 5 competitive seats, and so they've narrowed that down to just 2.
Right.
And they've kept the same number of Democrat strong seats and Democrat leaning seats. So that's why you said that there would be a +4, potentially a +4 here.
Yes.
But I think the more important thing for big picture is that you pointed out is that the argument for that district being drawn to make sure that there was some Black citizens represented by their own, but by at least some districts. In this case, one district in particular that's being talked about. What did you say was the 5th district? Is that right?
Yes, 5th district.
Yeah, 5th district. It's currently the old map. It was +21 Democrat. Yeah. Now it's gone. And so the question is, both sides are claiming that they have a legal right to either make that district be more representative of people who are Black, people of color, or take it away because they're supposed to be colorblind. And so this is like a train wreck in the courts. We'll see. We'll be able to figure out how the courts feel about equal protection clause and other election implications of civil rights.
And I should point out that now Al Lawson is living in what's called Florida Second. If you look at the Panhandle, it's the middle one of the 3 big counties there, or districts. And Neil Dunn is the Republican incumbent there, and Al Lawson is the Democrat. And this gives Republican a 16-point average advantage in this matter, and so that is a big deal. And Al Lawson is also a pretty important person in the Democrats.
It's true that district didn't disappear; it got absorbed into other districts. So sorry, I misspoke slightly.
This takes us to predictions. We'll try not to be as long-winded this time, Dave.
Yeah, this is about gun safety legislation prospects at the federal level. And on first blush, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said he's encouraging bipartisan talks, but his exact quote was, "See if we could find a way forward consistent with Second Amendment that targets the problem." And so when you look at the actual things being said by people, for example, Senator Cruz or Representative Crenshaw, both of Texas, that doesn't seem like there are potential policies that are consistent with that Republican framing. And so therefore, I would say no matter what we see or hear in the coming days and weeks, it's very, very unlikely that they're going to come to terms with something at the federal level in this session. And like you said, possibly even until some other filibuster reform occurs.
Yeah, Cruz showed up at the NRA meeting, even when all the other Republicans were chickening out. All right, my prediction goes to Orange County. We had our redistricting in California. It's done by an independent commission, although there's still accusations that somehow there was gerrymandering, but there really wasn't. And one of the stars of the Republican was a flip in Orange County by Representative Young Kim, a Korean American who was very conservative and won But her district has been redone, and where she's living, she only has about a fifth of her former constituents. It's still a Republican-leaning state district, or I would say more competitive district than it was. But she could probably win if she got to November. But I'm predicting that she's not going to make it through the primary because you've got a Democrat who's also running real strong who could beat her, and then there was a Republican challenger who is his name is Greg Raths, who may very well show up and be the runoff against the Democrat, which means that it will flip Democrat, because I don't believe that Republican is kind of a paper, scissors, rock, paper, scissors scenario. But I'm predicting that she does not make it into the primary, and therefore the Democrat wins in November. With that, I wanted to ask you to stay informed and stay engaged. Until next time.